I can't believe I am actually going to sit down here and write this story out after I have lived it so closely for so long. I know that there will be those among you who will hate to hear it and there will be those who love it. So be it. John David Martin is my name and I am a cop. No, that isn't exactly correct. I am more than a cop. I am an investigator. My title is Special Agent J.D. Martin. I am good at what I do and I rarely fail to solve the cases that are assigned to me. I know I sound egotistical and in some ways I am, but I also am just stating the facts. I was on a case. It was a hot-ticket case, the RP of 2 young girls and the abduction of one of them. It made the news and it would continue to be forefront in people's minds for years to come. Everyone who knows me calls me JD, including my beautiful wife Allison, Allie. We have been married 5 years and we have no children. I think our marriage is pretty normal and in most ways I would call it special. Allie is in fact very pretty and sweet. We grew up together and were always good friends and it just blossomed into love and ultimately engagement and then marriage. She was always the best thing to happen to me and I have had a lot of good things happen to me. Bill Jacobs is the director of our task force and years ago he took a liking to me and the work I did. Because of that I have had every opportunity to advance and I haven't wasted any of them. I am 32 years old and second in command of the task force. I know it had a lot to do with Bill's support but I also earned it by doing a great job. A year ago Bill called me into his office and told me that there had been a double RP and that one of the girls was in the hospital and the other had been abducted. The girls were sisters, Mary and Janice. According to Mary, their uncle Josh picked them up from school and drove to his place out in the desert. She said he and his friend Garvey had repeatedly RP'd the 2 girls. Mary was in pretty bad shape emotionally and physically and the 2 men decided to drop her off at the hospital and take off with Janice. Both of the men were always a bit unstable but hadn't ever done anything like this before. Bill knew he didn't have to ask me to take the case but he did. He told me that he believed if anyone could locate Janice and bring in Josh and Garvey it would be me. I was sickened by the facts just like everyone else and agreed to take the case. I took Gina, one of our female officers who partners with me most of the time, and went to the hospital to meet with Mary. Gina does a fantastic job and I trust her with my life. I knew she would be invaluable in talking with Mary. Mary had been stabilized and was ready to give a statement with all the details she could recall. Mostly Gina, gently walked her through the entire ordeal, getting as much information as possible without upsetting the young girl more than she already was. She was unbelievably brave and was able to tell us everything. When we were finished I told Mary that we would do everything we could to find Janice and bring her uncle and his friend to justice. I never promise because you never know for sure what you can do, but I wanted to make a promise to that girl. I think she knew I would give it my all. Gina and I worked the case relentlessly. We worked 18 hours a day for 3 days straight. In a word, I was obsessed with the case and so was Gina. I am sure that is where the cracks started in my relationship with Allie. She complained to me that I was working too much. She complained that I was spending too much time with Gina. I looked at her while she was chewing me out and couldn't believe it was my sweet wife. I told her that out there was a scared girl who was counting on me to find her before they destroyed her and I would be damned if I was going to slack off until I found her. I guess I pretty much told Allie to S it up and stop being so selfish. Well, on day 4 we caught a break. Someone spotted Garvey in Creighton, a small town at the far eastern boundary of our county. He had gone into a grocery store to buy some supplies and had been seen by someone who recognized him. There had been some pictures of Josh and Garvey in the papers but not everyone had seen them yet. We were lucky that this guy had seen the news. Several carloads of officers converged on Creighton but when we got there Garvey was nowhere to be found. Supposedly he had just left town and driven south. I knew that part of the county pretty well and formulated a plan on how we could systematically check out every possible hiding place in the area. We started by setting up a perimeter 10 miles out from Creighton. Then we started fanning out to cover the territory. Once again we got lucky. It was only 3 hours after Garvey was spotted that we found a shack out in the desert and sure enough Janice was there. She was badly abused and beaten but alive. We were able to call in a medical helicopter and she was taken to the hospital in Tyler. Unfortunately Josh and Garvey had slipped past us somehow and were nowhere to be found. I knew it would be difficult to locate them but I was determined that they would not get away with this and I made a promise to myself that I would find them and see them punished for what they had done to these 2 girls. We went back to Tyler and Gina and I went to the hospital to check up on both girls. Janice was out of surgery and was in recovery. Gina and I just sat there talking about the case and I made it clear to her that I was going to find those 2 slime balls if it was the last thing I ever did. I could tell that Gina was pretty emotional about the whole thing too, so I put my arm around her shoulder and gave her a little hug and smiled to reassure her. I told her we would get these men and bring them to justice. When we had a chance to slip in and talk with Janice, she told us that her Uncle Josh and Garvey had decided to leave her there and were going to light out 4 parts unknown, as they put it. She thought she heard them say something about South Texas, but she wasn't sure. Other than the details of the RP and abduction, she couldn't be much more help in locating the 2 men. We were overjoyed that both girls were safe and that they were going to recover. I know they were going to need extensive counseling and continued support from their friends and family, but I was sure they would be okay. On the last day of that week, I promised them I would find their uncle and his friend and bring them in. I know, I shouldn't have promised them, but I was that certain I would succeed. I guess here is where the story really starts. I continued to be obsessed with finding those 2 men. I am not apologizing for it, but it is true. I spent most waking moments working that case. I followed up on leads that others thought were cold trails. I wanted justice and I did not want to fail in my promise to Mary and Janice. Needless to say, the situation got worse at home. Allie was constantly telling me that it was silly of me to work so hard on this case. The girls were both found and both doing better. I kept telling her that bringing Josh and Garvey to justice would help in the final healing for those 2 teenagers, and she kept telling me that I should let it go. I worked that case for 5 weeks and our relationship got more strained every day. Then we caught our final break in the case. It was on a Tuesday morning when I was informed that the boys had been arrested in Lake Charles, Louisiana on a drunken disorderly charge the night before, and the arresting officer was a cousin to the chief of police in Beaumont, Texas. I had been in contact with the chief of police of Beaumont, one Manny Grayson, many times in the past 5 weeks because I was following all leads in the South. He let me know that they were in custody in Lake Charles and would be held the maximum amount of days to give us time to process an extradition. In 2 days all of the paperwork was processed to extradite the 2 men from Louisiana to Texas, and I made arrangements to go pick them up on Friday. I was going to drive down to Beaumont, and Manny, Gina and I were going to go over to Lake Charles and bring the prisoners back to Texas. I figured that the trip would take me about 5 hours each way, so I planned on leaving about 4 a.m. so we could have Josh and Garvey in custody by 10 a.m. and be back in Tyler before 5 p.m. When I was up and ready to leave, I leaned over Allie and kissed her on the forehead. I said, "Goodbye, honey. When I get home tonight all of this will be over and I will make it up to you for all the time I have spent on this case." Her response was less enthusiastic than I had expected it to be when she said, "Well, don't hurry back on my account, JD. I am sure I will find something to keep me occupied until you get back. I have been on my own for the last 6 weeks, so nothing new there." It was just as bitchy as she had been to me all that time. Now I knew I had not been paying enough attention to her, but I thought she knew how much I loved her and that this was only a temporary thing. I thought she would be overjoyed, but all I got was the sarcasm. I knew I would have a lot to do to make it up to her, and I was more than willing to do it. I missed her too, but this case was ultra important to those girls, to our town and to me. I would make it up to her. I knew that part of the county pretty well and formulated a plan on how we could systematically check out every possible hiding place in the area. We started by setting up a perimeter 10 miles out from Creighton. Then we started fanning out to cover the territory. Once again we got lucky. It was only 3 hours after Garvey was spotted that we found a shack out in the desert, and sure enough Janice was there. She was badly abused and beaten but alive. We were able to call in a medical helicopter and she was taken to the hospital in Tyler. Unfortunately Josh and Garvey had slipped past us somehow and were nowhere to be found. I knew it would be difficult to locate them, but I was determined that they would not get away with this, and I made a promise to myself that I would find them and see them punished for what they had done to these 2 girls. We went back to Tyler and Gina, and I went to the hospital to check up on both girls. Janice was out of surgery and was in recovery. Gina and I just sat there talking about the case, and I made it clear to her that I was going to find those 2 slimeballs if it was the last thing I ever did. I could tell that Gina was pretty emotional about the whole thing too, so I put my arm around her shoulder and gave her a little hug and smiled to reassure her. I told her we would get these men and bring them to justice. When we had a chance to slip in and talk with Janice, she told us that her Uncle Josh and Garvey had decided to leave her there and were going to light out 4 parts unknown, as they put it. She thought she heard them say something about South Texas, but she wasn't sure. Other than the details of the RP and abduction, she couldn't be much more help in locating the 2 men. We were overjoyed that both girls were safe and that they were going to recover. I know they were going to need extensive counseling and continued support from their friends and family, but I was sure they would be okay. On the last day of that week I promised them I would find their uncle and his friend and bring them in. I know, I shouldn't have promised them, but I was that certain I would succeed. I guess here is where the story really starts. I continued to be obsessed with finding those 2 men. I am not apologizing for it, but it is true. I spent most waking moments working that case. I followed up on leads that others thought were cold trails. I wanted justice and I did not want to fail in my promise to Mary and Janice. Needless to say, the situation got worse at home. Allie was constantly telling me that it was silly of me to work so hard on this case. The girls were both found and both doing better. I kept telling her that bringing Josh and Garvey to justice would help in the final healing for those two teenagers, and she kept telling me that I should let it go. I worked that case for 5 weeks and our relationship got more strained every day. Then we caught our final break in the case. It was on a Tuesday morning when I was informed that the boys had been arrested in Lake Charles, Louisiana on a drunken disorderly charge the night before, and the arresting officer was a cousin to the chief of police in Beaumont, Texas. I had been in contact with the chief of police of Beaumont, one Manny Grayson, many times in the past 5 weeks because I was following all leads in the South. He let me know that they were in custody in Lake Charles and would be held the maximum amount of days to give us time to process an extradition. In 2 days all of the paperwork was processed to extradite the two men from Louisiana to Texas, and I made arrangements to go pick them up on Friday. I was going to drive down to Beaumont, and Manny, Gina and I were going to go over to Lake Charles and bring the prisoners back to Texas. I figured that the trip would take me about 5 hours each way, so I planned on leaving about 4 a.m. so we could have Josh and Garvey in custody by 10 a.m. and be back in Tyler before 5 p.m. When I was up and ready to leave, I leaned over Allie and kissed her on the forehead. I said, "Goodbye, honey. When I get home tonight all of this will be over and I will make it up to you for all the time I have spent on this case." Her response was less enthusiastic than I had expected it to be when she said, "Well, don't hurry back on my account, JD. I am sure I will find something to keep me occupied until you get back. I have been on my own for the last 6 weeks, so nothing new there." It was just as bitchy as she had been to me all that time. Now I knew I had not been paying enough attention to her, but I thought she knew how much I loved her and that this was only a temporary thing. I thought she would be overjoyed, but all I got was the sarcasm. I knew I would have a lot to do to make it up to her, and I was more than willing to do it. I missed her too, but this case was ultra important to those girls, to our town and to me. I would make it up to her. When I left the house I was in full, go get the prisoner, gear. I had everything I would need to bring those a-holes back to justice with a capital jail. I had arranged for Gina to go with me since I knew this case was special to her too, so I stopped at the station and picked her up as we had arranged in advance. We drove in silence for about 2 hours, both contemplating our own thoughts on the events of the day. I looked over at her a couple of times and she was deep in thought, so I didn't say anything. Suddenly the silence was broken with our phone ringing. Gina picked it up and listened for a minute, then handed it to me saying, "It is the director." "This is JD, I said. "What is it, director?" "JD, pull over so we can talk," he replied. So I found a spot to pull off the road and Bill proceeded to tell me that the extradition order had been rescinded by Louisiana. Apparently an enterprising assistant district attorney had thought to run DNA comparisons of Josh and Garvey and had a hit on an unsolved RP and murder from 8 months previous. Since they had the murder along with the RP, it was decided that Louisiana would prosecute first, and therefore we weren't going to be taking them back with us to Texas. Although Gina and I weren't happy about not getting justice in our own jurisdiction, we both understood that their case had the greatest potential for the death penalty. In Texas, because there was no murder, we would probably only be able to put them away for life. We grudgingly agreed to leave the current prosecution to Louisiana. Actually, we had no choice. They had the boys, and we didn't. I did get on the phone though with Manny to be certain that he informed the Louisiana court system the two should be held without bail since they were obvious flight risks and were facing additional criminal charges in Texas. He assured me that he would communicate with his cousin and that they would not be released. When all talk had ended, we turned around and headed back to Tyler. Bill had told us to take some time off since there were no pressing investigations now that Josh and Garvey had been apprehended. We stopped for breakfast on our way back and I dropped Gina at the station around 11 a.m. and headed home. When I got home and opened the garage door, there was a car parked in my spot. I know, there is always a strange car parked at the poor slob's house. But it was true. It was a hot red Mustang and I thought I knew whose it was, one Billy Marconi, a local badass. I of course had a very bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, and even before I entered the house I felt the rage building in me. I knew what I was going to find and I knew I wouldn't like it. I quietly entered through the garage into the utility room and from there worked my way through the kitchen, foyer and up the stairs to the bedrooms. There was no evidence lying around like you might expect, no shoes or piles of clothes, but when I reached the top of the stairs I could hear them in the master bedroom. "Oh God, Billy, you are so good. Every time seems to get better than the last," Allie said. "You like it, Allie? It is better than that a whole husband of yours, isn't it?" replied Billy. "Oh yes, Billy," she said. As I walked down the hallway to the bedroom I could feel the blood pounding in my head and I knew I was pretty much over the top. I reached for my gun and just about had it pulled out of the holster when my hand grazed the stun gun that every officer carried when transporting prisoners. It was a good thing, I guess, that my hand touched it, because there is no telling what I would have done with the gun. When I peeked into the room, I could see Allie on her hands and knees with Billy. I quietly walked into the room with the stun gun in hand and was able to get right behind him and zapped him right in the you-know-what. He went down like a rock onto Allie's back, and when she rolled him off of her, I zapped her too. With both of them out of it, I took out one set of handcuffs and handcuffed Allie to our bed. There was no way she was going to be able to get away from me or impede me in what I was going to do to Billy. Then I handcuffed Billy and dragged him out of the bedroom and down the hall to the basement doorway. I think he bumped his head a couple of times sliding down the stairs, but I really didn't care. I handcuffed him with his arms around one of the support beams and blindfolded and gagged him. By now he was starting to come around again, and I let him. "I will be back to take care of you a bit later, Billy, don't go anywhere," I told him with a malicious laugh just before I zapped him again. I went back up to the bedroom and sat in a chair alongside the bed. Allie was crying softly and my heart was aching, but my anger over what I had found was greater than my compassion at that moment. I took the stun gun out and laid it on the bed in plain sight. "Allison," I said, "I have a few questions to ask you, and you had better answer them honestly. If you don't answer honestly, I am going to use the stun gun again and again until I get the truth. I will know it is the truth if you and Billy give me the same answers. So here are the questions I asked her. How long have you and Billy been having it? How many times have you been together? Where have you met to have it? Does anyone else know you have been having it with Billy? Do you like thing with him better than with me?" These were her answers. "Today is the only time I have ever had it with Billy. Just this time. Only here this one time. No one else knows. And no, JD, the thing with him was not better than with you." Now, I had already heard her say, "Every time seems to get better than the last," and, "Oh yes, Billy," so I knew she was lying to me, and I told her so. "Allison, those answers are not the truth. I warned you what lying to me result in." I picked up the stun gun and gave her the full charge once again. When she came around, I told her, "I am going to talk with Billy, so while I am gone you better think about the correct answers. I will be back." I took the stun gun with me and headed down to the basement. I pretty much knew what was going to happen when I asked Billy the same questions. I knew he would lie, and I knew I would zap him a couple of times. Believe me, I was hoping that was the way it would go. I snarled at him, "You piece of, that does it. I will give you 10 seconds to tell me the truth the next time I ask the questions, or I will zap you." I zapped full bore and for an extra long time. I asked, 10 seconds, Billy, remember it. When did this start? I started counting, 10, 9, 8, 7. When I got to 5, he blurted out, "About 6 weeks ago." "How many times did you and Allie have it?" "At least once a week each of those 6 weeks, and sometimes it was twice a week, so maybe 8 or 9 times. "Where did you do it?" "Always here in your bed. When you were going to be gone for a while, she would call and I would come over." "Does anyone else know you have been with my wife?" "No, I kept her to myself. Some of my guys know I am meeting a woman, but no one knows who or where I go to meet her." "Billy, is there anything else you would like to add? Is this the truth this time?" "No man, this is the truth. You know I am sorry I did this, but you know she came on to me and all, and you know how it is, man, guys just aren't that strong to turn it down. Big mistake, the dumb should have kept his trap shut." I told him, "I will be back later to finish up with you, Billy, don't go anywhere." And I gave him one more lengthy surge with the stun gun just because he pissed me off. I walked back upstairs to Allie and said, "Well, Billy seems to have come up with the truth. He doesn't seem to care for this stun gun very much, so he spilled his guts. Are you ready to be honest with me now? Answer the questions, Allison." She couldn't look at me, but she started. "The first time was about 6 weeks ago. We have been together once or twice a week for each week. So that is maybe 8 or 9 times. He always came here and always in this bed. No one else knows, JD. And I did like the thing because it was so dirty, but I love you and the way you make love to me. JD, I am so sorry." "Allison, I know you are sorry now. But what I don't know is if you are sorry you did it or sorry you got caught, and I will never be able to know that for certain, and I can't live like that. I am going to go and take care of Billy, and then I will be back to let you go." I picked up all of Billy's clothes off the bedroom floor where he had dropped them in his rush to bed my wife. Damn, it pissed me off again as I walked out of the room with them. His cell phone dropped out onto the floor. I noticed that it was an older BlackBerry, and I had an idea. I dropped Billy's clothes on our kitchen table and walked out into the garage. With Billy's car keys in my hand, I got into his car and backed out onto the driveway, closing the garage door behind me. I drove north out of town until I reached Interstate 20 and headed easterly to Longview, about a half hour away. I stopped at the Walmart on the southern side of Longview and bought 2 burner phones. Then I went to the other 2 Walmart stores in Longview and bought 2 more phones each, so I had a total of 6. From there I drove to the Radio Shack to meet up with an old friend of mine. I sat and explained my idea to him, and after a guarded warning about what I was about to do, he helped me get the rest of the equipment I was going to need. When I got home, I copied all of Billy's contacts, all of his text messages and all of his voice messages to one of my new phones. Then, using the equipment and apps available, I cloned his phone. Yeah, I know it is illegal, but at that time I really didn't care. I wanted to keep track of that bastard, and I was going to. With that out of the way, I went down into the basement and had a heart-to-heart with Billy. I told him, "Billy, you are nothing but a lowlife, and one of these days I am going to find a reason to put you down. I know you are pissed, and I know you wish you had never seen me, but too bad, you have. Here is what I expect. You will never say a word about any of this to a soul. You do not know Allison, and nothing ever happened to you here in this house. You are never going to see or talk to Allison again. I will be watching, and any contact whatsoever will result in your immediate demise. Do you understand me, dirtbag?" He nodded his head yes, but I wasn't satisfied with that. I said, "Do you understand me, dirtbag?" This time he said weakly, "Yes, I understand you." I released him from the handcuffs and told him, "Then get dressed and get your ass out of my house and never, and I mean never, show your face here again." After he left, I grudgingly walked up to my bedroom and released Allison. The bed was a mess, but I really didn't care that much. I did tell her, "I am sorry you had to make a mess of things here, but it couldn't be helped. I will leave it to you to clean up after yourself." I then proceeded to throw a few things in a duffel bag and told her, "I am going to leave for a while to think this whole thing through. I will be back to let you know what is going to happen." She tried to grab my arm to stop me and begged me, "Please JD, don't leave me, please stay. I am so sorry." I said, "Yeah, I am sorry too, but I have to go now, but I will be back." I checked myself into the Staybridge Suites Hotel near downtown and spent most of Friday night and Saturday thinking about what I wanted to do going forward. Sunday morning, when I turned my cell phone back on, there were around 20 messages, most from Allie. I really didn't want to listen to any of them, so I just paged through the ones from Allie and listened to the rest. There was one from my boss, a couple from Allie's sister, and one from Allie's father. I immediately called my boss to let him know I was fine and requested a few days off. He was okay with me taking a few days but told me to keep in touch. I realized that I hadn't eaten since Friday night and realized that wasn't such a good idea. I went down to the hotel restaurant and devoured a huge breakfast. I spent the rest of the day fishing at Tyler State Park. I caught several nice bass on a jig and worm, but I didn't keep any of them. Better to let them grow and let someone else have the fun of catching them. By dinner time I was tired and hot, so I went back to the Staybridge and took a shower, then went out for dinner. Having resolved in my own mind what I wanted to do, I went to bed and actually slept very well. It was Monday and I had taken all of the morning and most of the afternoon to take care of some business before I went back home. It was around 7 p.m. when I walked into the house for the first time since I had left on Friday night. Allie was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I had stopped to pick up a couple of sandwiches and some chips, so I set them on the table in front of us. She looked at them and then up at me and said, "I really am not hungry, JD." "I know you probably aren't," I said, "but you really should try to eat a little. After you eat we will talk." She reluctantly picked up the sandwich and took a bite. I think that first bite spurred her appetite, so she then ate ravenously until the entire sandwich and all the chips were gone. When she was finished, she looked up at me and smiled, but then burst into tears. "Oh JD, I am so sorry," she said. And she started sobbing uncontrollably. When she finally settled down, she went through the whole cheater's checklist. 1. It didn't mean anything to me, it was just thing. 2. I love you and never intended to hurt you. 3. I was going to end it. 4. Some of the blame is yours because you were so obsessed and I was lonely, and so on and so on. You know what you always hear. When she finished I said, "Are you finished now?" "I know who, when and why, so nothing else matters to me. None of your statements mean nothing to me. It was it, but with someone other than me, so you shouldn't have done it. If you love me and didn't want to hurt me, you should never have done it. And yes, sure, you were going to end it, in a pig's ear you were. And finally, if you were lonely, why didn't you spend time with your dad or your sister? No, you had to find a boy toy to stop you from being lonely. And this was my fault? My efforts and obsession, as you put it, were to apprehend kidnappers, and as it turns out they were also murderers. I would say my efforts were not obsession but devotion to duty and public safety." I continued, "Allison, I have no idea who you are anymore. The woman I married would never have done what you have done. She would never have allowed herself to be treated the way Billy treated you, and she never would have thought so little of me that she would have betrayed me like you have. I have no idea where the woman I married is now, but I am certain that she is gone forever. I am certain that I can never have her back. It is too late for that. I am also afraid that the man you married doesn't exist anymore either. I used to believe that if you did the right things in life everything would work out just fine. I have lived my whole life by that principle and look where that got me. I don't believe anymore. I don't think it matters what we do anymore. So, the man you married is also gone. Allie wouldn't stop sobbing as I was telling her all of these things. I know it was hard for her to hear, but it was also the truth. All of this had come to me over the weekend while I was struggling to figure out who I was going to be now. Oh, I knew, but I wasn't about to let on to anyone. So Allison, I said, I am leaving. I put the folder of papers on the table. These are divorce papers. Let me tell you what is in them. First, there is something you have that I want back. My great-grandmother's engagement ring that I gave you, I want it back. It is part of my family history and I want to keep it in my family. I am sorry to ask for it because I really thought someday we would be able to pass it down to a daughter or to a son for his fiancée, but that is not to be, so I want it back. Oh my, her sobs increased in intensity twofold, but I continued, please give me the ring now. She looked at me pleadingly, but I just shook my head and she reluctantly took it off her finger and handed it to me. Secondly, Allison, I continued, you know that I receive money from my family trust. Some of it is in our accounts along with our investments and savings, and I want you to have it all. I will continue to receive money from my trust, so I will have all I need. More sobs. Damn. I intend to keep 100% of my pension, I added, because your IRA account is almost exactly the same amount. I see no reason to share my pension in any way. Finally, I said, the house. As you know, we do not own the house. It is also part of my family trust and it will continue to be held that way. That trust was set up long before you and I married and would be considered premarital property. You have no legal claim to the house or any of the family trust. But, that is also why I am giving you much of our money and investments. They are about equal in value to the house. In addition, you are of course free to leave this house anytime you wish, or you will be able to live in this house as long as you want. The trust will take care of every household expense as it does now. You will only have to leave if the trustee informs you that you must leave, and he will not do that unless I tell him to tell you to leave. If that happens, you will have a month to find another place to live and move all of your belongings out. Again, there are household furnishings that were part of the family trust and I expect you to leave them behind if you leave. You know what they are. Her sobbing had finally stopped as she peered up at me with red and swollen eyes. There are only 2 conditions to you staying here, I said. You will not entertain your men here. I will not have my family home be a WH house like you have made it the past 6 weeks. If you do that, you will be physically evicted from this house immediately, no time to find a new place to live. Of course her sobbing started all up again. And, I continued, if you remarry you will be expected to leave immediately. I will not have you living in this house with a new husband. So Allison, I sighed, that is it. That is my offer. It is not negotiable in any way. Have your attorney look at the papers. Sign them or don't sign them, I really don't care. Either way I am still gone. Either way I will not be your husband any longer. Our marriage is over, either with a legal stamp on it or just practically, but it is over. If you sign the papers, give them to my attorney and he will complete the process. Of course by this time she was inconsolable. There is one more thing we need to do before I leave, I said. We are going for a ride. We went out to my squad car and I told Allison to sit in the back seat. She didn't know it, but I wanted her there so she couldn't get out. By this time it was around 9 p.m. and the nightlife of the city had begun to rock as it always did. We drove into the seedier part of town and I stopped at a curb outside one of the hotter pickup spots. There were a number of women standing around and I walked over and talked to them for a minute. Allison was still in the back seat of the squad. I took one of the women by the arm and led her over to the car. Get in the back seat, Brenda, I said. So she climbed in and sat next to Allison. As I drove off I could see both women in the back seat sizing each other up. After we were out of the seedier part of town I pulled into a strip mall parking lot and continued with my plans. Allison, I said, this is Brenda. I am going to ask her a few questions and I want you to just listen to what she has to say. Brenda, what is your real name? Damn it, JD, you know who I am. I know, but I want you to just answer all of my questions, Brenda. Okay, I am really Judy Parker. Are you married? She sighed deeply and said, not anymore. Were you married? Yes, to Ron Parker. And who is Ron Parker? He is an assistant DA in the city. And why aren't you married to Ron Parker anymore? He divorced me for cheating on him. And Brenda, what are you now? Goddamn you, JD, you know what I am, I'm a prost. Are you happy now? No, Judy, I am not happy and I know you aren't happy either. But, why don't you tell Allison here how you became a WH? Don't leave anything out. By this time Allison's eyes were bugging out and her mouth was hanging open. Well, Brenda, Judy, it all started when I met Billy Marconi at a social gathering. He was handsome and so charming and really liked being around me. My husband was so absorbed in schmoozing with the big shots at the party that he just seemed to be ignoring me, and Billy stepped in to make me feel good. We had several drinks together, and before I knew it we were out on the patio. He whispered things in my ear that I had never heard from a man before, how he would make me feel if he could have me alone. I was vulnerable and he took full advantage, but of course then I didn't know that. Before we walked back inside we had made arrangements to have lunch the next day at the Carlton Hotel restaurant. Of course you know what happened. We ended up in one of the rooms and Billy F'd me silly. I loved it. He was so attentive and so wonderful. That started the long road to where I am now. He started coming over to the house when Ron was gone on business. He would do it all day sometimes. Then he started bringing some and I was hooked. One day Ron caught us and threw me out. Billy took me in and the long road to my demise was suddenly shorter. Before I know what had happened to me I was hooked and Billy was hooing me out to everybody and anybody. Then he found someone new to work on and he just relegated me to his stable of girls. So that is where I am today. I could see Allison just shaking in the back seat. She was in shock. I asked Brenda, how many girls does Billy have in his stable, Brenda? She responded, I know of 4 other girls turning tricks for him right now. Every once in a while one of them goes away and a new one comes in. One last question, Brenda, I said, what would you do with Billy Marconi if he were in the back seat there with you right now? I'd gouge his eyes out. I made a horrible mistake when I took up with him and he ruined my life. Most days I just wish I was dead. Well, Brenda, I continued, one of these days you just might get your chance to have at it with Billy Marconi. He has F with the wrong guy this time. She smiled at me and said, JD, if you ever give me that chance you can have free for life. Allison cringed and shot her a pretty vicious look. Too bad, Allison, I thought. But I doubted I would ever take Brenda up on her offer. I gave Brenda a few of $100 and asked her if I could drive her home instead of back to her pickup spot. She thought that might be a good idea, so we took off for her house. After we dropped Brenda off I took Allie back to the house. We sat in the squad car for a few minutes before I let her out and I gave her my final speech. Allison, I still refuse to call her Allie ever again, so now you can see the slippery slope you had started on. You can see what you were so close to becoming yourself. You can see where your life was headed. I have done this last good deed for you because I loved the woman I married and because I don't want her to become another Brenda. We are through, but you don't have to be another Brenda. Take control of your life and be the person you are meant to be. Build yourself a good life. She started to say something and I hushed her. Allison, there is nothing to say. It is too late to say anything. From now on your future is entirely in your own hands. Goodbye. Now, get out of the car. I opened the door to let her out and got back in the car and drove off. My new life was going to start up soon, but that will have to wait for later.